Hello and welcome again to New Kevin Smith, The Great Witness Show. The Great Adventure Series is. We're here with New Kevin Smith from UK. I'm Dean Bell, and we'll be listening to Kevin's experiences on the real side, and then commenting and asking questions. So welcome, Kevin.
In this real side experience, I entered a kind of ancient temple, although its location was curious, as it seemed to be nestled between houses in a modern-day street, so somewhat out of place. The temple wasn't that large seemingly from the outside as you approached it. It was perhaps no wider than a standard house. The street where it was actually in my neighborhood on the physical, not my actual street, but about a mile or so from it. I had the impression that no one could see this temple but me, that were others to have been passing by on the real side at this moment. They would have been oblivious to its presence, as though for them it didn't exist. And perhaps this was indeed the case, as the simulation we each experience on the physical and the real side is based on what we decide it to be effectively. For those who are generally very one-dimensionally focused, very physical, astral, and content with their consciousness, with what they know as to its construction, they will only see that which their consciousness comprises of. They won't explore much beyond the thrills and inclinations that they have agreed, decided on, and installed as idea programs into the consciousness. To see more than the consciousness, you have to decide to step into the unknown, that you can be shown more of the multi-dimensional parts of yourself and all of creation. And once this is decided, your bubble of consciousness illusion is not so all-encapsulating, and the guides, with agreement to their assistance, can show you more than what you currently know, and what you currently are, as the effect of your consciousness as it currently stands. So for those becoming more aware, they are always potentially in a position to see more. They may well encounter other individuals on the real side as they go about it, unconscious individuals perhaps, if through whatever agreements the aware individual retains through the personal self, or what they are facing or agreeing with idea-wise on the real side, for whatever effect they have decided to feature in. All of these factors can allow the presence of any number of individuals in our real side experiences. Many may be inadvertent extras that are interwoven with the ideas we have agreed with. The simulation we have chosen to engage with directly through the personal self, rather than just to sit in our real awareness and creational overview, aside from everything simulated. on the physical, we may constantly be encountering individuals of various levels of awareness and recognition also, as we go about our activities, as we present and share as we do, as we retain agreement associations with family members, for example. But there, of course, will be a great difference in awareness and recognition, despite our standing in the same experience as others on the physical and being aware of each other. We are able to perceive each other, as we both have agreed to the particulars of the same position on the physical, and our decoding physical body apparatus renders the shared idea causes that have us then sharing the same effects into the same shared simulation, and yet these others may have awareness only of the physical, of their personal self-situations on the one-dimensional arena, and ours may extend far greater awareness through all the aspects of the personal self and its vehicles, and awareness of the real awareness also. On the physical, despite this differing awareness, we are rather resigned to the physical level simulator visually, as it's like wearing our virtual reality headsets with the game of our consciousness loaded into it, that until we remove it when we sleep and move our awareness beyond the consciousness, our awareness is rather stuck in the virtual reality consciousness game, and so we will generally see the same as the unconscious will on the physical level, with a few variations, as every body vehicle is slightly different. The mechanisms of perception can differ, again according to what an individual has decided. Some choose to develop psychic abilities, and can see into the astral from the physical, etc. But on the real side, beyond the consciousness, we now can see far more than just the physical level, as we connect with a real awareness that is through all creation, and then we can be potentially shown anything of the ideas that the simulator comprises of. But for those who cling to their consciousness, they rather take that with them, the illusions of it, and sit in that on the real side. And although we may encounter these individuals as we might on the physical, it can be a case that we are able to see them, but they can't see us. For the real awareness, if connected with, will show us everything we need be aware of in each moment. But the disconnected personal self-immersed individual will be resigned to their decided consciousness, and although we can see all individuals who feature in our simulated real side experience, they may not necessarily see us, so lost in their illusions that they are. Illusions that don't include our simulated presence. And as Dwayne says, for the one-dimensional unconscious unaware, when they transition, They don't know where they are. They drift about aimlessly. They have nothing to relate to, as they didn't take the time to be aware of more than just their physical position, and as such they seem lost in their own bewildered ideas, and eventually return to the physical for another lifetime, back to what they know. And this doesn't just apply to other people, but any idea really. People, personal self-simulated vehicles on the physical and real side are just ideas also besides, and so you can have features, structures, and in this case temples that can be present, but that which only certain people may see. If the temples, etc., don't feature in the ideas that make up the consciousness that the individual is clinging onto. You can't have a building in your game if your simulated game hasn't the idea coding included for it in its program. But also, if you happen to engage with other individuals specifically, you are also agreeing to all their ideas, and even their abilities and skills to feature in your experience. As such, you can have talented creational manipulators on the physical and the real side, able to create in your experience. Just as the guides create scenes and situations for our real side experiences as we agree to them, so can this be so with other individuals with a similar capability. The dark forces, for example, with all their faked UNUversities and mocked-up ideas, etc. And again, it can be so that even with experiences shared between new friends on the real side, what one may be seeing may not be the same as another. For as awareness recognition differs, so we have different views, and are shown different aspects of the experience, according to what we need to know or be shown at that moment for our awareness process. This seemed rather the situation here, as I knew that a being of tremendous skill and ability was within this temple, a temple by his construction, and so this could be an inadvertent encounter as a result of the process of facing the whole of life and creation. As we turn over every creational stone to complete our awareness, we will have confrontation and engagements with all manner of beings and individuals that the ideas we are facing are affiliated with. For as with everything interwoven with agreement as it is, we always take on more than we see on the surface. Or maybe a being able to take advantage of agreements through the personal self-consciousness, as I operate through it on the real side, or any number of backdoor agreements through my simulated idea engagings that facilitate the presence of others into our experience. I was accompanied by another individual, I had no impression as to his identity, only that he was equally on his awareness process, and whatever we had been doing, facing or opening windows for the incursion of others into our experience, had found us here on this street, before this temple, with a powerful and ill-intended being that resided within, as was my further impression. With the idea being to face creation and what crawls out of the woodwork as part of the process, in we would venture. And it was as though the being within knew we would enter, and waited patiently for us inside. The temple, though no wider than the other buildings in the street, extended for quite a length. We passed through a dimly lit and very Egyptian-themed series of chambers, with all the artwork, the paraphernalia, the decor, etc. Finally coming upon the individual whose temple this was. He was hard to describe. His body form, almost unable to stabilize into anything that made sense. But he was very large, very muscular, adorned with rich attire and jewellery, that again had him look rather like an Egyptian king. He would attack us without provocation, and would seize my companion and seemingly absorb him into his very chest. This certainly wasn't a favourable outcome for my companion, but as with everything and every situation, as the deciders of our simulation, it is we who decide what takes place, including all adversity and situations we'd rather not experience, though the fact that they happened indicates agreements that they can be so. Agreements in this case to this curious, ill-intended being. But even should we fall foul of others, or situations on the real side, if we harbour agreements through the personal self that allows such to be, if the overall intent is maintained with the ears, then we just continue on, make the necessary adjustments, chalk it up to experience. We can even redo the experiences, etc., as long as we're with life and the real guides, we're okay, regardless of what happens with our personal simulated selves. So again, what happened to my companion was based really then on his decision. He simply experienced his agreements as they stand, and it would fall on him to deal with it, and any assistance could only be provided if again he agrees to it, and if his own agreements, most likely subconscious, don't conflict with the decision for assistance, and thus the ability for assistance to be offered. This strange creature then turned its attentions on me, intending that I would suffer the same fate, and I'm uncertain as to what this absorbing into his body represented. Some form of containment or other was my impression, and who knows how this may have looked from the view perspective of my companion. However, I had a kind of blue crystal that my personal self didn't even realize was in my possession until I plunged it into the chest of this being. Real awareness motivated action that the personal self just watches on bewildered as to the whys, whats, and hows. But even on the simulated side, as we take on these effects on the real side, the real awareness will deal with situations, but again, only to the extent that the personal self will allow. If, say, the personal self holds onto agreements that allows an individual's power over us, then we are deciding on this simulation and preventing the ability of the real awareness to then effectively deal with the situation and the individual. If these agreements are such within the consciousness, the best recourse is then to move from the simulation to the real awareness aside from it, and aside from a consciousness that has such agreements within it that results in situations we then can't resolve. But sometimes, as is the process, we are to face what we have created, decided upon, and agreed with, and go through it, rather than just hide, because such situations that we can't deal with then reveal agreements to be addressed. And as such agreements are going nowhere, we may as well deal with them as we come across them. And for whatever reason, the plunging of this blue crystal into this being's chest should have vanquished it, or nullified it in some way, and perhaps then a case of getting another disruptive being out of the way, one who clearly delighted in destruction, tormenting, and the interference of others. Effects that again this creature had decided on himself, as everything equals our decided choices, actions, and intent, and the delivery of that which such beings have chosen to experience, their karma can come in various forms. But my inability to do this, as the crystal was unable to penetrate this being's chest, suggested that, like my companion, there must be agreements through the personal self, again very likely subconscious, that were hampering my real awareness and its ability to manage the situation. I rather expected to then suffer the same fate as my companion, but instead this being would take me deeper into the temple. We were standing in a part of it that now became overlapped with imagery, and as we stood amidst it, he would gleefully gesture to all the scenes taking place within this imagery. And although my personal self didn't recognize the scenes, as they were beyond its current memory files of experiences, through my real awareness, I knew that these were glimpses, scenes, and flashbacks to events that I had experienced and decided on through many, many prior lifetimes. This being was able to access these lifetimes, presumably through my causal Akashic records, and display them for me to see, and also the specific events he chose from lifetimes past were those where I had been the most abrasive, the most twisted, choosing in ways as far from beneficial, life and awareness speaking, as was possible. For we all have done these deeds in lifetimes past, but what's important is what we are deciding now in this new moment, where our intent lies, etc. But evidently this was an attempt at discouragement, to have my personal self dismayed as to my acts of a past life foulness, an effort to perhaps have my personal self take on ideas of guilt, shame, etc. What he showed me was very vivid and a little personal self overwhelming, and as he waved his hands and the imagery faded, he even would offer me a deal, that he could recreate any situation I wanted. He could take the form of anything also, and I could relive some of these past lifetime experiences, and maybe even just stay contained within them, like illusions of perpetual foulness forever. And maybe this is what happened to my companion. Perhaps he was somehow seduced by such an offer, and that this being had the power to do this, and now maybe he was trapped in this illusion of whatever it was that he wanted through the personal self that this being had provided him, and so it would be up to him if he could tear himself from such a predicament. But I was rather shocked at the very idea of being locked in illusions of the type he had revealed, the experiences from past lifetimes, and would adamantly decline this offer. This being seemed somewhat unconcerned as to my decisions, merely shrugged, and suddenly the temple was gone, and I was on the street. I wandered about aimlessly, stuck rather in my personal self, with all the considerations, emotions I was entertaining in regards to what I had been through, as what the being showed me had riled up all these old lifetimes, and none of which were very admirable. Interestingly, I was completely naked too, so in a way, maybe that being had assisted my process of awareness, unbeknownst to him, that I had revealed to me lifetimes of experience that I hadn't been prepared to face and deal with until it was rather thrust into my awareness, and so it was a sense of as though that which I had been denying or blocking was now out in the open, exposed, faced, and this was reflected in my absence of anything clothing-wise. But seems I was in quite a state through my personal self, and had almost the sense that I also was homeless somehow on the real side, as though I had moved beyond my personal self-consciousness, and the agreement to be resigned to that, but taken on the personal self-notion that I couldn't possibly go anywhere near real universes with such past lifetimes of atrocious behaviour. Although, as I said, it's all about the real intent in this moment, not about what we did even a moment before, let alone lifetimes ago, and regardless of what we've done, been, or decided, it's about what we're deciding now, and moment by moment. And it seemed this sense of homelessness was gradually abating, as sense was slowly restored, and I began to find clothing just laid out on the ground, as though left for me. I found a backpack. I found a pile of money, as though life was indicating its support for me, despite my personal self-ideas. And then a military-looking police van pulled up beside the road and gestured for me to enter. I had the impression that the police officers were the real guides, as often their no-nonsense and focus, with the singular purpose of standing real and making sense with life positions, can be expressed with the discipline you see exhibited through military and police, and so this form can best express the guides and what they are all about. As I was still out of sorts, as I was still floundering in my personal self, I imagine that had me rather vulnerable on the real side, especially as I wallowed in my guilt and shame, and although fading as it was, it may have me very susceptible to attack. And even with the real awareness, if I was attacked, but harboured personal feeling ideas of lack of worth, this would very much express as an experience where I'd very likely even accept the attack, as though taking on the idea of being deserving of it, and such a consideration would then hamstring the real awareness, as it couldn't go against what was the personal self's free will decision to experience such ideas. So the real guides had arrived. Realizing my predicament, I would suggest. Agreements with them maintained that they can feature in my experience at any time on the real side, and rather took me into protective custody, as it were, until I could balance myself out and restore my equilibrium. A little time to resolve the experience I had been through, while the guides guarded me effectively. But of course, their ability to protect, like the real awareness, depended on the parameters my personal self set as to the extent of this protection through its agreements, but with a disconnect from the real awareness, as we sit in the personal self through its activation, can have us rather forget momentarily this real awareness standing and the protection thus afforded by doing so. And so, in such situations, the simulated visuals of real guides appearing to the personal self can be enough to help ease the individual out of the personal self and into an acceptance of assistance, agreement to allow life, the overall awareness, to support the awareness that we also are, as awareness tends to do, a support of itself effectively, of the personal self simulated, created selves that all awareness animates. And so a heads up really, and perhaps then I was meant to be shown this also, that I could share the experience, and others take heed of what was another very powerful being with extreme capability, with an inclination to interfere and disrupt, and with the ability to lock individuals in simulations of their choosing, tempting them through experiences long forgotten in the lifetimes of consciousness, or shocking them into the considerations of lack of worth, etc., through lifetimes of misdeeds being shown, that may derail their awareness process if the individual incorporates and so decides to be thus influenced.
We saw this hypnotist the other day on TV. He was talking about his work, and this relates to the temple here that you saw that other people didn't see on the real side, and how he really described how hypnotism works, how he works people. And this whole thing, this whole arena here, the creation, people are hypnotized in a sense. And he described it in a certain way. It was regarding the LA County school system. There's a little like cartoony, like 3-minute couple series of why you should wear the mask and how we're going to implement the on your cell phone, the code that you need to show to get in, that you've been tested and you're COVID free, etc. But they had this like cartoon about it. He was breaking down the cartoon, how it was basically a method of hypnotizing people or brainwashing them a certain way with keywords, setting up expectations, imagery. I mean, he did very well, very good job in how he explained how the government is like doing this to parents and children to promote their agenda with the COVID. So it's very interesting. And this is going on all the time with the controllers. They know how to basically alter perception for the humans. Another example, Agenda 30, you will be happy, being enslaved, basically. I don't remember the terms, but you'll be happy living in a, little apartment in the city and blah, blah, blah. Do you remember the phrase? Something like, but the idea is you'll be happy being enslaved, You'll have a smile on your face. You'll have all you want, but you'll be under our control, but you'll be happy about it.
I think the actual phrase actually came from Aldous Huxley originally, the one who wrote Brave New World, when he said he could foresee a time in the future when everybody would be happy with their own enslavement and they'd be openly opening their arms to being completely medicated, controlled, and also through technology. And so that was back in the 1930s he was saying that, and you look at the world today.
Yeah. Well, apparently he was part of the club, so he knew what was coming. Him and George Orwell. Potentially, so you mentioned potentially in a position to see more, and that's where we're at with the new presentation. We have this potentiality to see more. We're not locked into certain viewpoints. The tap lines, removing tap lines, give us an opportunity to see more and have the potential. And Dwayne talks about that too. Just everybody has potential, but they don't see it because they're locked into their own agreements of and slavery. Yeah, take nothing to relate to when people pass over, because all they're bringing with them is their one-dimensional view, and that really doesn't work on the other side when you lose the body. So like you say, they float around and until they decide to come back again because they don't know anything better. But that's why we talk about preparing yourself for what's to come. We're not just a physical body, we're a lot more. Study your 4 other bodies, read Dwayne's books, look at New Kevin Smith's YouTube channel, get the lowdown how we have 5 bodies. You should study each body and see how they operate here in the creation so you have a better survival opportunity. Yeah, this being here that you met in the temple, to the personal self, he's, and in the physical, anywhere, you know, we're kind of awed by people who have more skill than we do, or abilities, or any kind of talent. To the personal self, that's kind of like, oh, you admire them, or you know, think you kind of like, or have a certain attitude with that. But that's why it's key to note that awareness supersedes everything, even this kind of thing where you think maybe someone's better than you or has more skill or ability than you. And this fellow here, this being, you were kind of set off by him a bit temporarily until the guides kind of give you a breather. But we see that everywhere. We could get kind of, you know, jostled a bit by people who have more of whatever. It's good the way you objectively view your experiences. Not many people do that. And you started this from the get-go, bringing an objective viewpoint to your experiences. Most people just have their experiences and they don't really take a look at them. So that's why we're doing this, so people see that you can really stand back and look at them, and there's so many views to these experiences, and you're giving yours here, which is cool. This fellow that you were with, yeah, he got eaten, you say. But he handled you a different way, this being, because he saw you were more aware, so he did the guilt trip on you. He showed you your past experiences or past lives, lives that were full of, you know, maybe bad things you did, you know, so that kind of threw you a bit. But he used the guilt and the shame thing, which is, you know, what so some religions use here. But your abrasiveness in the past, okay, you got over that. We don't have to own our past. If people think we have to own it, just because we have these experiences. I mean, there were experiences anybody could have had. We just had them. But again, we're not tied to them unless we agree to that. So we can just use them to become more aware with. But actually, in a way, they're not our experiences. We don't have to own them, in other words. We can utilize them, but we don't have to carry them with us. You're naked, homeless, okay? But, so you had that experience, but then life, in a way, gave you the clothes, a pile of money, etc., And then the real guides came up, military police van, gestured you to come in and give you a break. And like you said, what we're deciding now really makes a difference, not what happened in the past. Because there really is no time or past or future. It's just right. Everything is right now, but that's very challenging for the personal mind to see, because it's so concrete here. Time is so concrete that it's hard to see that. But the more you look at it from different angles, the more you can see how that is. Because your awareness supersedes all of this stuff that we're experiencing. So that's it for me. That was a neat experience. I remember that one. Yeah.
I only shared it a few weeks ago, I think.
Do you find, do you go back and you see it differently? Like, would you go back a couple weeks from now and see this, you see more of it?
Well, as I'm reading it, I'm sort of seeing different viewpoints and additional explanations. So
yeah,
what the details that it represented. For example, when I was plunging the crystal into its chest, I didn't really elaborate on what I considered that to represent, as at the time I didn't have any views for it. But it's quite interesting that it was the chest that I plunged this crystal into, and I mean the chest, which would be the heart, from a personal self perspective, would represent more emotion. So we'd be talking about the emotional body and emotional attachment. And also the crystal was blue, and blue would represent the mental level, which would be an idea agreement. And the fact it was a crystal, the crystal represents the ethereal level, which is subconscious agreement. And so it was almost, to me, a combination of my representing my trying to release the emotional attachment, the idea agreement, and the subconscious agreement all in one representation that to this being, and who he represented by the plunging of this crystal then, which was a combination of all the three elements, the ethereal, subconscious agreements, the blue colour of it being the idea agreements, the literal mental idea agreements, and the fact I plunged it into the heart represented the emotional attachment, and that was almost a representation of that. And whereas the other individual, he was just absorbed straight into the heart of this being, which suggested his emotional attachment to this individual was retained. And obviously the fact that I was unable to do that with the crystal suggested that I was unable to remove that particular tap line. It was very interesting with these Egyptian, because he was Egyptian in his appearance, but it wasn't just like he decided to go into a wardrobe and put on an Egyptian costume just for the sake of it. It was more of a case that, I mean, whether or not history is as we have been told that it is, there has been an Egyptian era in some dimension or other, and at that time there does seem to have been very powerful beings that were operating on the physical level around that sort of era. And you see them, obviously they were worshipped almost like the deities and such, and you see a lot of depictions of them in the hieroglyphs where they're very oversized bodies and they're strange, and a lot of them do seem to be very alien in their appearances. And I think Dwayne said on a Skype that there were a lot of Egyptian very powerful beings that presented as gods, and there was a lot of a religious type ideas that stemmed off from them, and a lot of emotional attachment to the religious ideas that stemmed from these beings. And so a lot of people do have real side experiences where they seem to be encountering what seem to be these almost like alien beings, but in Egyptian attire, and especially a lot of the things that look, because you see these various cat-like beings, dog-like beings, even reptilian and all types. And so I would suggest this was very much likely attachments or agreements with this individual from lifetimes past that still then were maintained, that allowed him then to feature in my experience now. And obviously this individual is still deciding to maintain his inclination to want to play around with the psychic sciences, as I said, he had very powerful creational manipulating ability. And so that's where I think the attachments came from. And of course, with me as well, a lot of my lifetimes past I have been involved in the sort of psychic sciences, because that seems to be my general thing. I seem to chase that particular thrill, seeking that particular thrill of dabbling in magics and the psychic sciences and through the ethereal vehicle. And so I do have a lot of attachments and agreements I'm dealing with and working through and releasing that are affiliated with that, and then affiliated with a lot of the beings that were associated with that in whatever lifetimes I forged the tap lines. And so that's why, as I said on the other Skype, at the moment, it seems like I'm going through a lot of that, and a lot of these very powerful beings are now featuring in my experiences, like the one I shared the other day, when there are those funny 3 beings who were trying to somehow, again, of similar creational manipulating ability, and they were trying to adversely affect the consciousness of me and this other individual. And it's very possible that that other individual was also this individual in the experience I just shared. I just had the impression now, just as I was saying it, I think that was the same person. So that would suggest that even though in the experience I just shared, he retained his emotional attachment, which had him absorbed into the chest, into some strange simulation this being had created, that obviously he has then possibly extricated himself from that position. And so I would then see him again in an experience that followed, which I shared the other night, where him and I were there again, and in the presence of these other beings as well. And so it's very likely this is an individual, that the individual I was with that in this experience got absorbed by this creature. This individual is probably someone I've also had an attachment with, that I've been with in lifetimes, that is very likely possibly a new friend now, but I haven't recognised as being somebody I've had past lifetimes with. But again, I don't know the identity of him, but I say it's really interesting how all these things tie together, and you can sort of interlink everything when you see the connections. Yeah.
These tap lines come in layers, as I see it. So sometimes you can't just blow them away, because there's so much agreement there, and so many experiences through past lives. I've had experiences with the Dianetics, which is part of the mental part of Scientology, where they call it auditing, where they go back and through your past lives. most recent into the next most recent, back, until you blow the whole string of tap lines. You get to experience each event and sit there with it and become aware of it without any emotional attachment before you move on to the previous one that triggered that one. So it could be like 10 experiences where you fell off a cliff, where you pushed off a cliff. Originally, you had this impact, you hit the ground, and this trauma that you carry with you. And then the next lifetime, you're again pushed off. Maybe, and then the next lifetime, maybe someone threatens to push you off, but you still have this traumatic memory of it. So you carry that tap line with you, and it kind of builds on itself until you face it. That's why we say facing things are so important. But in this auditing process, very simple. You just sit there and remember the past time you were scared of falling off a cliff. You sit there with it, be okay with it, and there's an e-meter. You're holding this meter that reads electrical charges, so if the needle moves, it means you just have an emotional charge still. If you're okay with it, it doesn't move, so you go on to the previous experience before that. Oh yeah, there's a next one. Yeah, I remember Bobby telling me, or saying, let's go hiking in the Sierras, and you have this charge. Oh, it's high, and I'm kind of scared, and so you have this memory of it, and then this emotional reaction. It could be tied to some stomach ache or some physical reaction, like a headache or something like that. So you go through all these experiences, relive them, so you don't have any more charge to them. and then you can blow the tap line eventually. But yeah, if the tap line's too much to handle at one time, you do it in layers. So. Anyway, tap lines, they're real. We have, everybody has them, you know, consciously or unconsciously, mostly unconsciously. So we get a chance to look at them through becoming more aware and doing something.
I was going to say, there was actually a view that Dwayne gave in response to the second experience. I went to go over the whole thing, but he briefly said that the controllers as they are today, you know, completely dominating the entire simulation. He said there would have been one time when they would have been something like a schoolyard bully and pushed over somebody, and that's where it began. And then just like how you were saying, how all the tap lines and agreements and the person's decisions continue to compound and become more so and escalate. And so from a schoolyard bully, lifetimes and lifetimes and millions of lifetimes later, there's suddenly a reptilian controller dominating the entire solar systems and universes. So
he's got to go back, way back to when he was a kid, schoolyard bully, yeah, to blow that tap line, or not, whatever. But you can probably do it express tap line removal with the real guides. There's ways to do it. What I described is very mundane, very literal. That there's all kinds of ways to do it. If you have agreement to do it, if you're willing to see more.
With the process you described, they put you into some sort of trance or something. You're in a hypnotic state or something to, in order to see.
Not at all. You just can close your eyes, be calm. You're holding the meter, and then just like, why do you have this stress? You know, every time I say cliff, well, because you know, left on the because my parents took me, you know, to Big Sur last week, and you know, I had the stress, and I'm remembering it. It's bothering me. Okay, but you have a foundation you've built before through, say, they have this communications course where you learn how to confront basically another person through a series of exercises. First, you just stare at each other. Be okay with that. You know, eye contact. And then you start adding something to that, like the other person starts trying to provoke you with anger or try to make you laugh or something, but you still maintain your calm. And it goes on and on, the exercises, so that you can handle, you know, it kind of gives you the practice of handling an experience. So then you do the auditing, and then supposedly you're more ready for that, to confront what happened to you. And since you're not really going through it, although you are emotionally, if you could just look at it calmly without any emotion, then you can basically blow it or get rid of it. If you can confront it, we keep talking about confront it. So that's kind of an idea with that. No, it doesn't have to be a trance or anything. But
So
you can. I mean, you can go back. Yeah, you can be there and start shaking or something. You know, yeah, but it doesn't have to be.
So you were visually seeing your experiences from past lives?
Yeah, and even some people can go in their past lifetime. Usually it's just this lifetime, but even that is a good start. I mean, that's why I don't promote this, because you can do auditing for, like, you can mortgage your house and sell your car, sell your kids, your dog, to go through this process. Is basically never ending. They can do this, they can just, I mean, it's never ending the way they do it, but I'm just giving you the idea that it's just an idea how the process works. You see it and you can blow it off. If you're willing to face it and see it, blow it off. But what they do, yeah, it's a business for them, so they can just go. I mean, it's never ending almost, until, you know, people do get rid of they call it engrams. Paul Twitchell too, in some of his books, call them engrams. They're like unconscious programs running in you that affect you physically and emotionally, etc., affect your perception. Okay, next. Yeah.
In this real side experience, I would find myself in a kind of stone complex, the setting actually very appropriate, considering what it contained, for there seemed to be 4 large, serpent-like creatures. We might construe these as, of course, representing reptilians. That they were so large suggested reptilians of some agreed and decided to authority. As often in real side experiences, I see large crocodiles and snakes that represent very influential and creationally powerful reptilians. That there were 4 might in fact indicate the reptilian beings that reside and oversee each of the 4 life levels, the reptilian created gods, from the astral to the etheric, beyond the physical, one-dimensional level. Or maybe the 4 large serpents represented the overall agreements through each of the 4 levels of creation to the reptilians and their designed simulated matrix. The emotional attachments of the astral, the mental agreements of the mental and causal levels, and the subconscious agreements of the etheric, either way due to the overall rigidity of restriction that all agreements to the reptilians, through all aspects of the personal self effect as collective simulated experience, then, as I said, that the setting was a solid stone complex that looked very ancient was rather appropriate, as representing a simulated realm that was housing, made up of, these 4 creational level agreement representing snakes, a creation realm that has become as rigid as it has, as a reflection of the limited ideas agreed to that make up its construction. Interestingly, one of the giant snakes was dead, and my impression was that it had been killed by myself and all those that are stepping up and becoming more aware. And the situation was that these other snakes were aware that one of their number had been killed, but didn't realize who was responsible, for if they did, I knew they would attack me. The idea seemed to be that we were to now kill the other 3, but in such a way that would go unnoticed, so that, as we killed each in turn, the ones yet to be slayed would not rear into retaliatory action. It wasn't literally that we had killed the life level agreement representing snake, but more that enough agreement had seemingly been redacted to the extent that the support to the reptilian systems, to their designed matrix, and to the life level reptilian god at the life level that that particular snake represented had been withdrawn. And the idea was now that this process would continue, that agreement be withdrawn from the other 3 levels, from the other parts of the personal self that retained agreements to the reptilians. I'm uncertain as to how extensive this withdrawing of agreement was through a creation, or if it was just representing those becoming more aware, who were overall successfully extricating themselves from their attachments and agreements. For, of course, to be able to supersede a creation, you have to release every idea that binds you to it through cause and effect. But could it be that this was another future view of a wake-up that is so effective, that extends throughout creation, as it is doing, that we might potentially even see a complete withdrawing of agreement from one entire aspect of the personal self and life level, that ultimately, ideally, releasing all agreements throughout the 4 aspects of the personal self would be the objective for all, but somewhat unrealistic that it would be so on such a vast scale, but maybe enough that one life level of agreement to the reptilians can crumble and effectively die. But a complete simulator releasing of agreements to control is not impossible. And naturally, as it is a process, the other parts of the self that cling on to agreements or attachments, all the ideas of the simulation that make up each level of agreement, of the snakes that still were alive, well, that very much would present as resistance and opposition to having its agreements threatened. I'm not sure which life level then was effectively dead in regards to agreement to the reptilians. I would doubt it was the astral, as the emotional attachments are the most difficult to release. The subconscious would take the most time, as that comprises of millions of lifetimes of tap lines that must be faced and released. So I might suggest it was the mental level, perhaps. That perhaps throughout creation the vast majority become at least literally aware of the reptilian control systems and redact mental agreements consequently. But then the battle would be with the other parts of the self, as the creational consciousness is rather divided through the vehicles of the personal self, until such time as all align with the real intent of his recognition, and until that moment this tug of war between the parts of the self and the life levels they effect very much can be represented by the giant life level agreement representing snakes that endure, aggressively maintaining the ideas they hold dear, and attacking that which they construe as a threat to their comfort zones. It's interesting how the snakes were not aware of what had killed perhaps then the mental level snake, perhaps again suggesting that although the consciousness of creation had redacted agreements mentally from the reptilians, that by and large individuals were still unaware of how creation works, the 5 vehicles of the personal self, etc., a lack of awareness then, but a move in the right direction. For until we recognize the other parts of the self, they rather take on a life of their own, on the life levels they effect, based on the decisions we make, and so we can amusingly have certain aspects of the self aligned with a certain intent, but the other parts of the personal self not, and they would rather be at odds with each other. And as Duane says, he is rewriting history, potentially changing the simulation. For if agreements and the consciousness change, so must the simulator it effects. So not even so much that everyone necessarily has the awareness and recognition to step out of the simulators, but maybe on a vast creational scale, enough awareness that they agree and decide on ideas that are not reptilian created and represent restriction, and so a creation that shifts into a different collective simulated experience, one that is no longer deteriorating due to the ideas of restriction that effect this into a being and must result in ultimately simulator implosion. And in such a place, yes, it's still the simulation, and the idea, the real purpose, is still to recognize the ease from the overall comparison that all creation provides, but at least everyone is afforded more cause and effect time, and they are not boxed in with subliminal, subconscious agreements, or bombarded and tortured on a daily basis through all the distorted technologies that their agreements to the controllers have allowed to be present in their collective experience. Of course, such a scenario, such a simulator alteration, even if making sense and beneficial, is based, as everything is, on agreement and the willingness, the intent to become more aware that all limiting agreements can be recognized and released. And agreement fluctuates. Always on the real side, we see the final end result of what is being decided and agreed to at the moment we are afforded such future views, but it must still play out in cause and effect on the physical. And as agreement fluctuates, so these views of agreement culmination will also differ in accordance as we see them on the real side. But this experience suggested to me the beginning of this possible scenario, of one entire aspect of the consciousness, the mental level releasing of its agreement to the restriction that it had up until now been maintaining and effecting into overall simulation, thus represented by the killing of one of the 4 giant snakes, and presumably it's conceivable that if enough people do become more aware, as all these tapline agreements to a restriction unravel, so will the simulator be transformed as the effect of a now reformatted consciousness, and that Dwayne then would have successfully rewritten history, recreated the simulator to one that makes more sense, where support of the all-natural environments throughout all life levels of the simulator is embraced, as everyone so agrees, and it is made so. Dwayne the great writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "Another step, step by step. It's great that you're shown these experiences, and you're willing to share them very candidly, right up front. This is what the world really needs. The world is looking for what makes sense, what's real now, etc. It just takes them a little time to recognize it. Regarding the snakes, there can be many definitions for this, but overall it would be the different levels: physical, astral, causal, mental. And then you have the subconscious, which is a part of the mental, but it's kind of its own area, because the mental is literal, and the subconscious is mainly unseen. Paul Twitchell kind of tied them together. That's why the 5th level was the so-called soul plane at that time. He never really mentioned the deep dark border. It was just kind of whatever in the tiger's fang. But as I came into this, I saw each position does have its own definition. Some of the so-called spiritual paths, meditation paths, transcendental, etc., they refer to the deep dark border as the void or nirvana. Basically the void that as you get past the mind, there's nothing there. Again, it's better that it's all defined now, and the real universes become the 7th level if we're going to look at it literally. But realistically, which is even better, it's an isness, all here and now. You don't have to travel anywhere, but a step at a time. We're going through this, and yes, we are getting agreement with the aliens, and we've been doing the alien images recently, as this is viewing it from their viewpoint and speaking to the aliens in a particular way, even the ones that are rebellious, and allowing their voice to be heard, because other people will see it, and they may not like it, they may be religious or whatever, but it doesn't matter. It's there, so they can deal with it or not. They can take the risk to have a real adventure, more so than just a boring life with a television set and growing old. Everything we experience and share all adds to it, and we see it as we go. And as we keep doing this and doing it, these reptilians and these other individuals are tired of destroying. Most of them are tired. They are just under orders, obligated, afraid, or guilty. They have all these attitudes, but they don't need any attitudes. We have to keep just telling them how they can be like the sun and they're just fine. Just give it up. Let it go. You've learnt what you have. It doesn't make sense to go into a darkness, because that's all you create. You just create a darkness. You become so good at creating a darkness, it's automatic with you. Wherever you go, everything is dark. And does that make sense? Where it's all destroyed, where you just walk across the ground and the grass and flowers die, just like in some of these scary sci-fi movies, where the monster or the robot comes along and everything is ruined, and they're going to have to live in that until it's all black. So we're putting it right in their face. This is the fun part, and that is that as it comes back, get ready to deal with it. Get ready to provide some real guidance here. REBISAR and the real guides are doing the same thing too, but they need our help also. They need the witnesses, etc. Because these creatures, these body types, they want to pick on us. Pick on the ones that are less aware and try to scare them off, etc. And so that's their little game. It's their fun, like a gang of guys picking on one kid, like bullies at school. It all starts there, and then it gets to this. It's all nuts.
And when you killed the snake, or the snake was killed, it's like an idea killed. Something killed on the real side. It's sometimes it's just an idea, represents something. So, and then we have these agreements we have, but even if we know we're agreeing to something, we still have to decide to see more or not to agree. And there's a part of it, it's another element to it. Besides just seeing it, there has to be a decision to go on, to see more. Some of these, like what I was describing before, it's kind of a passive system. They don't show you everything in this auditing process that the Dianetics had. It's sort of you are seeing it, but you're being led by somebody else, and it's kind of a passive way. But you actually have to decide to see more and to get beyond the tap lines. It's a decision you make, because otherwise you can go back. You can decide to have the tap line again. So decide not to go there and you'll be okay. And when we're not really destroying creation, Christians and other people sometimes have this idea of fighting evil with good and destroying evil. And it's not about destroying evil or creation, it's just a new position we're creating. So we don't have to deal with it, or we don't have to agree to the destructive side of creation and those who are doing that. So enough interference these days so we can create our own position. You don't have to agree to the controllers who are destroying it. Along with that, people keep creating, you know, it's not like creation just is. Creation is like always creating. It's always on the move, you could say. So that's why we talk about being new now all the time. There's always a new moment to offset creation, and because creation is movement, it's movement. The awareness is not, it just is, but it's a funny relationship. You still have to, like, you know, pay attention to creation and how it is, because it's always, people are always putting new creations up, and it's a matter of keeping up with what's going on now. That's why each cycle has, like Dwayne came in a certain cycle, Paul came in a certain cycle, which was a whole lot different. The consciousness was a whole lot different in the 50s and 60s, 70s than it is now. So creation moves along, the consciousness moves along, so you adapt and work with what you have. So creation is creation, duration, and destruction of it. That's sort of the cycle. So the golden age, say if you've heard the yugas, the golden, the bronze, the golden, the silver, the bronze, and the iron age or yugas. Iron we're in now, supposedly. The golden one was long. It was like way long, and then each silver was shorter, bronze shorter, and iron is even shorter. So maybe Dwayne, with agreement, can create. You can create anything you want. So you don't have to go along with the yuga idea. You can create something that lasts. I mean, still get a breakdown eventually, but you can make it, as I see, you can make it last longer, like the golden age. So with agreement, you can create a creation that's longer lasting, and you can position yourself better with others who are recognizing their place with the isness. But notice how people are talking about, well, time is really speeding up now. Yeah, because everything's imploding, everything is like imploding in on itself into the black holes, into the unconsciousness. So that's like natural with creation. Eventually that happens, but with agreement, we can extend it and we can offset it. With enough agreement, we can make it so it doesn't have to be so. But again, that's a huge, huge undertaking. Whether it's going to happen, I don't know, but we're doing something here, and we'll see how much agreement we get with all this, with creation. Okay, that's it for me, Kevin. Anything else?
You know, as you're saying, you know, the simulation is the consciousness, so alter the consciousness and release all the restrictions in it, and you must have, therefore, a far less convoluted and simulating a better state of being. And so it is conceivably possible that if enough restrictions and agreements to control are released from the overall consciousness, that the simulator must follow on for that, as the simulator is the consciousness. And so it is entirely possible that you can literally reset the simulator, and you could even conceivably return it to the golden age, although it's probably not very realistic to imagine that could be so, considering the compaction of the consciousness, but it is possible. And I was just going to say, in regards to I mean, really, agreements and decisions are really pretty much the same thing, really, and in that which affects experience. And so when it comes to tap lines are simply decisions that we maintain, that we are the constant effect of, and which obviously then are mostly subconscious. And the consciousness basically then consists of all these subconscious tap lines. This is on pretty much automatic pilot, like a computer like a computer that is generating a simulation that's constantly running. So that's all really tap lines are, just maintained decisions. And the reason why they're maintained is because generally we're not aware of them consciously, because they're all in the subconscious. So that's part of the process, is identifying and unveiling all these tap lines and facing them, then deciding their release. And like I said, I mean, even in recent times, the consciousness has shifted, because in the 90s, there was a huge explosion in the interests in all things paranormal, because at that time, that was when a lot of the big series were coming out, things like the X-Files and things like that, and there was a massive explosion in the interest and the acceptance of UFOs and aliens and such, and everyone was sky watching and getting interested in cryptozoology. And there's always been an interest, but it was always more in the fringe and amongst people that were considered a bit strange. But then around the 90s and the early millennium, turn of the millennium, I mean, there was such acceptance of it that it was no longer considered, you would no longer be considered strange for pursuing such interests. But it's interesting as well, at the time when that explosion, that almost opening up of the consciousness, as it almost was seemingly to wanting to become naturally more aware of what it had resigned itself to, and that was expressing in its want to explore and see more. And you know, so it was the interest in the paranormal became so. That was at the time when the dark forces brought out all their technology, all the cell phones around about that time as well. And it was almost like a case of they recognised that the overall humanity was becoming more aware. They were wanting to see and be more. They were expressing that through their want to, you know, be interested in the paranormal, that which is beyond that which is considered the norm. And that's the point where they tried to put the lid on it. And I think that's where they brought in all the heavy technologies, I said the cell phones and the much more sophisticated computer game and technology and such, which would obviously keep people more distracted and lock them back into the one-dimensional physical arena and curtail there to an extent people's interest in wanting to explore more. And you see the children today, I mean, they're just locked into their cell phones, you know, and whereas back then when I was younger and such, I mean, we didn't have cell phones and things of that nature. But then again, back then it wasn't necessary, because the consciousness was still very controlled. But as I said, the 90s did seem to herald in a sort of shift in the consciousness. And that's the point where they did bring in all these things almost to combat that. And I suggest that's why they brought the cell phone and the technology in when they did. So
yeah, it's another distraction. Besides the tap lines, then now we got a cyber world to deal with too. That's a huge distraction. So it's a lot to deal with, but also at the same time, it kind of expands people's, you know, from the cowboy and Indian days, it sort of gives people an idea that there could be more, you know, aliens out there, paranormal activities. So it kind of sets the stage for some people for what Dwayne's bringing in, which is the recognition of the is, which has never been really brought out or even recognized before from the past masters and saviors. They didn't even recognize this reality. So this is a huge opportunity here. And in a way, life is setting things up for that recognition for people. It appears to be, yeah, it's going downhill into destruction, but at the same time, you know, it's showing certain things. Life is exposing itself through alternative media and people that are having experiences like Kevin here, etc. So it's also giving experiences. The more dark it gets, the more, like Dwayne says, the more he focuses. So it gives us a chance to, you know, not pretend that there's a la la land here, that, you know, when things get rough, we can just keep our focus, and then maybe, you know, you'll be one of the lucky ones to see and recognize this reality that we're talking about, we're sharing. Okay, so anything? We'll sing the NUUU then, if that's it. Okay, we sing the NUUU to 10 minutes before bed and during the day to open yourself up to what life has to show you, very simply. New, you.
You.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks again.